and welcome to the latest episode of Climate Pioneers featuring innovators who are changing the face of corporate sustainability. I'm Heather Clancy, the editor at large at Trellis, and I am really excited about this guest here today. It's Andy Ruben, and Andy was the first CSO, Chief Sustainability Officer at Walmart, and then he later moved into their private label and e-commerce businesses. From there, he went on to found a startup very well known in resale, first known as Yurtle, later known as Trove, working with lots of brands like Patagonia, Eileen Fisher, Carhartt, others to help them get into the secondhand apparel business. These days, he's advisor for Boston Consulting Group. He is working with some early stage venture funds, and I'll let him name them in a moment. But I'm super, super thrilled to introduce Andy Ruben and welcome him to Climate Pioneers. Hey, Andy, how are you doing?
Great. Heather, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and I love your background because it combines this great multinational, huge corporation experience with a startup, right? That's a change that very few people can do very successfully. I want to start first with the CSO position. You were their first Chief Sustainability Officer from 2004 to 2007. What motivated you to take on that role? You were involved in the sort of core business. Like, what was it that excited you about doing that?
Gosh, a lot excited me about it, but really, the motivation was not losing my job, quite honestly.
Okay.
So and I'll tell you the quick story, and some people will know this, but I was very happily running global strategy for Walmart. I was living in Chicago. I moved to Bentonville for the global strategy job. And at some point, environmental topics were coming up more at Walmart. I'm working directly for Lee Scott, the CEO. And I'll recount the third time that he asked me to go run what was called CSR at the time. And we were sitting on an airplane. There were 4 seats. Lee was very traditionally doing the New York Times crossword puzzle, not looking at me. And he said something like, "Ruben, have you thought again about going to lead the environmental work?" And I said, as I had twice before, "Lee, thank you. I've talked to some mentors, and really what I should do is get a P&L. I want to go run neighborhood markets." And I remember Lee looking over his bifocals, which I now have. And Lee said, "My, we're so young to think we know what's best for us." And then basically for the next 2 days on our store trip, he barely talked to me. So I came home after our store visit and told my spouse, now living in Arkansas, this whole story. And she said, "Do not get fired from that job. Go back in there and tell that man you will gladly take the job." So I went back in the next morning and I told Lee I would love to take the job. But when I walked out of the room, it was so early in sustainability that the first thing that I remember, I ran into a colleague of mine and she asked what happened. "What went wrong? We thought strategy was going so well for you. Why are you doing environmental work?" And I would just tell you now, looking back with perspective, that was the best thing that could have happened. Like, it changed everything for me in my career, and I had no idea. Obviously, Lee was right. I didn't know it was best for me, and I'm really glad that he really insisted that I do that.
Why was he so insistent? Like, what was it that he was so focused on achieving there?
It's, looking back at 2003, 2004, there were a few global CEOs. Hank Paulson at Goldman Sachs pulled Mark Tursick in. Lorraine had just been pulled in at GE from Jeff Immelt, right? And so CEOs were basically pulling people. Hannah Jones at Nike with Mark Parker. CEOs at the time were pulling in strategy leaders, business leaders. Lorraine was running GE Aircraft. So it's, Mark was a trader on the floor. People were pulling in business leaders as opposed to environmental leaders to figure out, for Walmart, this is about license to grow and how Walmart, and we can talk about kind of those early conversations, but this was about how Walmart would make use of scale. It wasn't about phthalates. It was a very strategic conversation. And that was 20 some years ago. So it's hard to remember the context then. But
yeah, but I want what lesson could that moment give to the current moment, right? So
yep.
Apply
I've
that
thought a
now.
lot about this lately. It's hard not to see that when in those early years, there were no climate goals, right? Walmart, none of the companies that we talk about now had scope 2 or, scope 3, certainly not scope 3 goals. And the motivation was how you would figure out how this was a business strategy. So as we looked at those early years, it was essentially innovation anywhere in the business for decision makers and P&L owners that would do things that would work for customers to have better lives, to save money, to shop at Walmart more, Walmart shareholders to beat out other places investors could put their money and stock they could buy, and for society. And society was viewed as the biggest, longest term, broadest way to think about strategy. And we can talk about some of the examples of the wins, but they always had those three. And we look back at, light bulbs, detergent, whatever it was, it always had those three elements to it.
So 3 years in that role, was the most useful thing you learned?
Um, to really, to kind of do my best to be as bilingual as possible. When I say bilingual, I mean speaking a language of being out there to explore new ideas, but then speaking a second language, which was travel with store operators. What were they seeing? What were they frustrated by? Spend time with merchants. And if you think about those examples I just raised, if I spent time with the, John, I'm the person who had kind of consumables for Walmart. One thing he was dealing with was how you kept detergent to one aisle in a store. At the same time, I'd been out, in the kind of sustainability orbit talking about what was happening. And one thing that was happening was removing water. So as both of those were happening, it was an obvious pairing to say, what if we remove the water from detergent? And yes, it was a great way that Walmart could lead an industry that didn't need to move water all over the free planet because it exists in the washing machine, concentrate. It was a way that John could keep detergent to a 60-foot run at Walmart. And when you look at the changes that a Procter or Unilever would have to make to manufacture those, all of a sudden you had a great business case because they could either concentrate detergent or lose SKUs on Walmart shelves. And so it was kind of putting those worlds together where you could do things that were good for more stakeholders, but it wasn't about trying to achieve a climate goal. It was understanding environmental and social topics as the broadest form of strategy and leveraging that as innovators would think about quick wins, things they could do like detergent, innovations that would be a bit longer in time frame, and then game changers.
So then you've hinted this a little bit because you went from that role back into the private label, the private brands and e-commerce businesses. So how did that experience as the CSO shape your strategy there?
Boy, I was so naive. I mean, I'm sure I'm still super naive, but at the time was even more naive and, a bit arrogant. And I thought I'll just take these great sustainability learnings and we'll just put them into the products and supply chains. And I showed up and I'm writing the checkbook that I got in private brands was 100+ categories, everything you find in a grocery store. It was $20 billion check every year. And I thought if I can be writing the check, we'll just fix the way these things are made. And my vision was as simplistic as imagining that someday there'd be a conversation in Procter and Gamble where they'd say, how is Walmart private brand making such better product for less money? And somebody would say, oh, it's the environmental systems mindset. And they're doing these things with this mindset. But what you learn is that when you get into the business and you try to remove the air in the cereal box, because that makes no sense, nobody likes that, you realize how complex these systems are. And it's not as straightforward as just seeing the thing. You have to do the hard work of really being curious and understanding why they are like they are. And if you're going to change, we tried a cereal box to remove the air. It was a short, fat cereal box. We did remove the air. It didn't move the needle. And so it was kind of coming face to face with why the supply chain is like it is. And it does lead into where I eventually left to start Trove, which was kind of a realization we can get to, but a realization that even though we had 1,000 things we did, besides like light bulbs, there were just so many. We would shrink packaging. We would remove, we'd create more efficient. If you look at the forks, knives, and spoons, plastic forks, we took, if you see the hollow handle in a plastic cutlery, I'm trying to remember the numbers. I think it's 13% less resin and every utensil and 11% less cost. But then we'd sell twice as many of them. And so you'd feel like on a per fork, we were making progress, but on a like societal level, we're just going backwards slower, maybe faster.
The consumption.
And so,
yeah.
Yeah, you couldn't avoid the model that we were in, and you had to face that.
So what was that aha moment? Like you just referenced it, and Yurtle was the original name of the company, and we'll get to that in a moment. But what was that aha moment that said, hey, you know what? This secondhand thing, this resale, this re-commercing, which that word didn't really even exist at the time.
No.
What was the aha moment?
It was at the time. So, I mean, I think that there were two, the fork example, and there were hundreds of others like them, where you had to realize that even if you could make the model less bad, that wasn't good. And I think there was a realization that we had to figure out other ways of doing business that wouldn't simply be eco-efficiency. There was going to be a limit to eco-efficiency. And if we were really going to address climate and greenhouse gas and social topics, we're going to have to think in a bigger context. And there was a moment that I recall, I was still living in Arkansas, but I was out at Walmart.com. And I remember I was using Waze, the app that would help you find, it's owned by Google now, but Waze would help you navigate. And what was interesting about Waze at the time was that you would use Waze even if you knew how to get somewhere, because Waze would optimize your route as opposed to just giving you directions. And I think there was an aha that I had that said, gosh, Waze at some point will tell me to leave at 9:20, not 8:50 in the morning to get to work, because I won't just optimize my miles per gallon per car, I'll optimize the freeways. Like, we will send people out on the roads when there are fewer people, so they waste less time getting to the same place. And to me, it kind of threw me into a world that became the sharing economy in the early 2010s. And I would sit with the folks at Uber and the folks at Lyft and Joe at Airbnb, and we'd talk about how, boy, the best hotel room, the most efficient hotel room was the excess room you're not using. Like, how do we make use of, and the same with, I think shin guards were one of the first ones for me on the Yurtle platform. Was you'd see a bunch of kids playing soccer and think, oh my gosh, we've all just bought new shin guards, but all the people who are about to play soccer need shin guards. Why don't we just hand them the shin guards? So Yurtle was basically a platform that allowed, Facebook was just up and coming at the time, so you could connect with 2 degrees on Facebook and loan items to your social network.
It was a loan, so it was primarily a loaning marketplace?
Originally, it was loaning.
Yeah.
There was no currency. It was all on social capital. So just like you would thank people. So the end of a transaction was a thank you from the person who we would talk about generosity and gratitude. And it would be a platform based on social capital. We eventually added a currency to the platform called Yurtle Reuse Dollars. It was one of the first. I was very obsessed by decentralized currencies, and at the time was a bit early, 2011 for that world. But that world obviously is, a stable coin today, continues to emerge. And there are some things that didn't work about it, but the idea of loaning became giving, and then giving became transacting in a larger marketplace. And while there was still some loaning, it became clear that the friction of getting something back was higher than just handing someone that you didn't need back.
Mm-hmm. So why did the company get stuck?
Yeah. Boy, I mean, as always with any startup, I think some things were self-inflicted. I would do differently if I can go back. And some things were model-based and, of course, timing-based. The challenge with any platform that's in the used marketplace is that used items have a lower value than new items, just in general. And so when you take a low margin industry and you sell items for even less money, but do the same, if not more work, you have a financial problem.
Mhm.
And
You're talking about financial value.
yeah, I am. Other problems were to kind of keep on the venture growth curve. We had raised venture dollars.
Mhm.
To keep on the venture growth curve, some of the self-inflicted things, we really found a way to use free shipping and the best items to bring in new members. And the platform was 1 million plus active members a month. It wasn't small. It was successful by most standards to build a platform that you have 1 million active members trading items. But I could tell that it financially was not going to return the venture returns from the funders. And given my views from where I came from, I didn't believe that if it was a feel-good platform, we were going to create the change I envisioned and I wanted to be a part of. The change I want to be a part of is much larger. And so it needed to be something that would make sense in a mass scale, not a small scale.
What was the change you wanted to inflict or inspire?
Yeah, it just made more sense to me that instead of buying a new pair of shin guards for your daughter going to play soccer, you'd get the perfectly good shin guards someone else was done with. So it's just basically exposing all the items that exist in the world, not just the new items, and making it as easy to get the used shin guards as it was the new shin guards. And I was convinced that if we could either increase the value of the used shin guards or make it easy enough to get them, that would just be a better choice for all of us. And we'd get away from the model of producing more.
So you figured out, you said you had self-inflicted
Yeah,
mistakes. I'd love to know what you
always.
thought, what some of those were. And you said at some point you had another aha moment. This isn't working. We need to
Yeah.
pivot.
Yep.
And that actually wasn't something that many of your early employees was thrilled about. Like you
No.
definitely, you had disbelievers. Let's just put it that way. So, part one, what were some of the mistakes you made? Part two, how did you say, yeah, we got to change this and this is the way it's got to be?
Yeah. So at the time, the people that I was close with were, Manish had started Poshmark, James had started ThreadUp, Julie had started The Real Real. This is kind of like the ecosystem of, there was a
Those were
small.
all early employees of
No,
your.
none of those.
Oh
They
no,
were
so
early
these were
competitors.
all like competitors. Got it. Uh-huh.
Yep. We had a platform much like any of the platforms I just mentioned, and there were 100 more that no one knows the names of.
Right.
Gosh, I just thought
Anymore.
of Zarly, but I mean, there were so many. So at
Yeah.
first there were a few of us, then there were many, many more, and they were all platforms. And in some way, to have a platform really achieve scale or velocity, when James at ThreadUp had done the take back bag, that was a real innovation. Made it very easy to put the stuff in the bag, let your post person pick it up, and create supply. So everyone needs a trick, right? You need some way that you're going to have an unfair advantage in building a market as any startup. And Yertles at the time was social capital. We had a community. When I mentioned 1 million members, we had people who met each other and got married on the Yertle platform. We had an annual get together that was member kind of Yertler inspired, where hundreds of people would show up to meet each other in real life. Like, it was a vibrant community, but economically that wasn't going to be enough. And so, one of the mistakes I made was to get the growth we needed, we took some of the best items away from our best members and put them in front of new members. And it's something that I think a lot of startup founders or early startups face, is how do you use what you have to grow the community without hurting the community itself? And so one of the things that we saw at the time in the pivot was that we'd worked with Patagonia for a while. We'd worked with other brands because they liked the idea, right? Patagonia, Yvonne had always done surfboard swaps in parking lots. So they liked the idea of it. And what Patagonia and others would say for years is, boy, Andy, we love when we see Patagonia on the Yertle platform, but it'd be really nice if the jacket wasn't next to a coffee maker. Like, that just doesn't work for our brand. And so we toyed with the idea of like Patagonia pages on Yertle. And at some point, the aha was, gosh, Patagonia is actually competing with ThredUp. So ThredUp will sell a used Patagonia, which is great for ThredUp, but Patagonia will make no money off that, even though it's their product. They will get no customer data from that, and they can't control how the Patagonia item is listed. The same with an eBay or anyone else. And so it occurred to us that in this future, as used, the distinction between new and used is going away.
Yeah.
And as more of us loved used because we can get more value, wow, what are the brands going to do? So we pivoted to take the capabilities we had and allow brands to leverage the capabilities to compete in this new way. And so as Patagonia in that moment could add a channel, really used, they could integrate the used items, all the items they've ever made, not just the new items, into their stores, into Patagonia.com, with their existing customers. They could really win. And back to the mission that we were on, what I was looking for was to have more items come from the existing set of items that would ultimately allow people to make money and do better with those items than producing more net new items. And so the aha was, gosh, the best people to do that are going to be the brands. It'll be the Carhartts, the Patagonias, the Eileen Fishers, and the only people really doing it at the time were Eileen Fisher and Patagonia and REI with garage sales. So we started with those three companies. And the work to begin Trove was to convince those three CEOs that this is something they should do. They should do it online, and they should do it with Trove.
Got it. So let's go forward to the bigger market. Right now, the resale market is forecast to reach $350 billion by 2027. That's just one number I found. It could be others. What's driving that surge right now?
That I'm wearing value is the answer. And then an example, I'm wearing a shirt that's the Copels, a brand out of Paris that I believe I got on the Real because I love shopping used. And this shirt would have been, I could have probably bought it new, but I wouldn't have. But used, the shirt's the same price as a brand new item from J. Crew or Banana Republic. And so if I can buy this brand used, and I know it's in good condition, I'm getting a brand I wouldn't have been able to get for the same money. And alternatively, some people could get, if they were going to spend $250 on a tent, maybe they could now spend $100 on a tent because they could get that same tent in its second, third, or fourth life. And the question then becomes, how much effort and work does that take? And as that becomes easier and easier with the platforms and the brands and the stores, everyone likes value.
And it's the value, the financial value. Like the consumers are generally not buying because it's not consuming a new item, new resources. Like how many people think about the environmental aspects of this?
I think it's the order people think about it in.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, a small group, will think about that first.
Yep.
A majority of the market will think about it third. And the majority of the market will first think about, am I getting more for my money? Am I able to get a brand I couldn't get before? Or is my money able to go further with an item that already exists? Secondarily, they think about the friction, trust, ease. Third, they typically think about, oh, by the way, boy, it's great not to be buying net new things. Like that feels good. So it usually is third. And in my view, I'm good with it being first, second, third, fourth, fifth. What I really want to see happen is I want to see us change the way we work. And it just, when you think about the way that we operate from the sky, boy, making hundreds of billions of new items every year and then going through all of the sourcing, production, movement, selling only to bury them 9 months later back in the ground is kind of idiocy. And so why wouldn't we have the value of the social networks using technology that we have, of being able to have nicer things because we can get more use out of them, which doesn't mean we have to keep the same shirt forever these days. We also have the option to have 5 or 6 people to enjoy the jacket or the shirt. One of the lines we used to use a lot with early in Patagonia was we talk about miles per jacket. And then it morphed into a saying that it would go ski trips per jacket. But the question wasn't how many jackets you'd sell. It was how many ski trips would that girl's Patagonia jacket enable? How many nights outdoors would an REI tent enable? How many engineers per Lego set? How many engineers could you inspire per Lego set? And so what you start to get into is, I think, where we're actually still going with agentic commerce, which is, I don't buy a jacket to help someone's P&L at Patagonia. I buy a jacket because I want to be outdoors and they make great products. I don't buy a tent for REI. I buy it because I want to be outdoors.
So a couple more on this, and then I want to get into some kind of fun leadership questions. One is just thinking about the world that we're in right now, the tariffs,
Yeah.
which have been talked about as a big drag on commerce in general and consumer products. How do you think they might play a role in changing and reshaping this concept, this kind of thinking?
I don't think they are the sole driver, but I believe they're an accelerant.
Mm-hmm.
So the key, I think the key sole driver that matters more than anything is that we all erase the lines increasingly between new and used, assuming that we have trust of the item. So it is a customer shift that we all benefit from, I think, in this way. Where tariffs really help is that when it's always easier to produce for a brand or a retailer, it's always easier to just sell 5 more new items than it is to figure out a net new space. There's less reason to figure out a new business. If it wasn't for Amazon, none of the traditional in the late 90s or 2000s, which I was a part of, nobody would have wanted to do e-commerce. People were great with stores, right? E-commerce had to be figured out by people who are very happy with stores because it's what we all wanted. And then you've got good competitors like Amazon, who's stealing market share because they're doing things differently. If you're Walmart or Target or Best Buy, you have to keep up. It's not like people want the new thing. They must adapt because consumers adapt and competitors adapt. And so the same for resale. With tariffs, it gives brands and retailers an additional incentive to say, gosh, if bikes at REI keep getting more expensive, boy, I'm going to have a hard time if I'm in this role for 3 more years, life's going to get worse. And so if right now in a store, I can have 30 spots for bikes, and right now 3 of those can be used and 27 can be new, I'm just better off if I've got the ability to next year make it 10 and 20. Because maybe I can get a used bike back from an REI co-op member. I know where I sold them. I can buy one back and I can do a better job of serving a customer and make more gross profit dollars with a used one than a new one. Just have options.
Yeah. And when you talk about getting things back, that was the other thing I want to ask you about, because that's been traditionally sort of the sticking point is, where do you get the products? How do you get them back? What do you do to inspire people to give them back? So what advice would you have on that? And how does that play into like a sustainability strategy for a company?
Yes. Where brands and retailers have an incredible advantage is stores. The best way to get them back, just walk into any Arc'teryx store with an Arc'teryx jacket and hand it back and get a gift card. Nothing easier. And so just make it easy. Now, there's so many ways to do that. We are not supply constrained, right? We are ultimately, I think we are business model and ease constrained on making it as easy to get the better quality item in the same way you get the new one. And as brands like Arc'teryx are figuring out this economic model, which they really are, and when I say they are, I mean to make as many gross profit dollars on used as new, as that starts to happen, which it is now, you'll be shopping at some point for a new jacket for $200. And a good retailer or a good brand will say, by the way, Andy, here's the perfect, same exact one that already exists in the world for $120. Do you want that one? Or you want to go forward with a purchase for $200? And that's just an option for me. But I will more likely go back to the brand when they make that available. So I think getting the items back is just a matter of ease. Where that matters sustainability-wise, and when I was day-to-day at Trove, we wrote what I think is an important paper on this with Worldly. to understand the carbon implications of trade-in, because there was a lot of concern on you're giving out a gift card for the trade-in, etc. The key metric for anything here, to simplify all the scope 3 work, the key metric is when you bring back an item, if that item gets sold to someone and displaces some new sales growth dollars, you're good. If you are bringing back hundreds of thousands of items and they are never displacing any of your new growth revenue, so if you're bringing all back, but you're not reselling any of them, in other words, they're not shifting the model from your growth from a new model to somewhat of a used model, you're not really doing anything scope 3 either. Sounds simple.
Yeah, right? So here's something that won't be simple. I've got about like 10 more questions for you. Really short answers.
Okay.
I'm going to squeeze your brain for the next few minutes. You ready?
I'm on it.
Okay, so this is a word association. Less than 5 words, your response to the following. Resistance.
Needed and beautiful.
Okay. Action.
What really matters in change.
Joy.
My reason for being.
Ally.
Often more important than the first movers.
Ooh, I like that. Hero.
Harder and more needed now than ever.
Thank you. Okay. You have a few more words on these, but again, succinct, please.
That was succinct though, right? I mean,
that was perfect. I'm going to give you a little clappy thing. I wouldn't be able to do it, so there you go. Okay, so Andy, what's the best way to rise above no?
Okay, one of the favorite quotes I have was, "Don't accept no from someone who can't say yes." And I will add one more thing that I think is really important. Every time someone says no, there's something behind it. Don't miss the opportunity to understand that.
Right. What's the biggest mistake you've made, and what did you learn from it?
Biggest mistake I've made. Probably it's always hard to know when you're on the right track, you just need a bit more time, and when it's time to change course. I think it's an impossible question. And there were moments that I could have spent more time really investigating that choice as opposed to blindly running forward. And I think that the net impact of that is that I have missed the opportunity to try and do more things and change things faster.
Who do you consult for a reality check?
So many people, and I collect them in different ways. Like I have 2 long-term venture people they're my phone of friends for the really hard problems. So I feel like over time, I've amassed a network of dozens of people that I go to for different phone of friends. Some people I'll go to on venture advice or private equity advice or transaction advice. Some people I go to for career advice. Some people I go to push me, who are very close to me, on me being authentic. Am I saying one thing, but really I mean something else, and I'm just not being honest with myself? So I think the collecting a group of people that can really do that for you and knowing when to pull them in, and more often than not, pulling them in more.
What question should someone ask every new hire?
I think getting a picture of why they've done what they've done in their past is probably the best predictor to how they approach and see the world. I think that's really important in any future endeavor.
How do you recharge?
Music, by far. Getting to, I play guitar and I sing, neither one very well, but I think that activity with other people is something very different for me that I can't express how deep and meaningful it is, but it's just another place.
Okay. What one book should every sustainability professional read?
It is not a sustainability book. It would be business context book. And I think it needs broad context right now because sustainability is an inevitable part of any strategy for business. So recent books that are there's a book I just finished. I'm always actually in danger of recommending my most recent book. Scale is a book I just finished that does a great job of understanding complexity theory for society, cities, companies. I think that's a good book. How the World Became Rich is a pretty broad book. And if one of my still favorite books of all time is The Black Swan, which just looks at kind of black swan type events and how you don't see them coming and they shift everything.
Yeah. Okay. Two more. I promise we're
Okay.
almost done. What advice would you give to a new chief sustainability officer?
If they are not coming from operations, live with operations. I think the need of understanding why things are the way that they are and what people need short term and longer term to achieve their bonuses and be successful is so essential to building longer term thinking in time frame into current business.
Right. Okay, and last one. What advice would you give your 21-year-old self?
This is advice that Rick Ridgway from Patagonia gave me a few years ago, and so I have to credit Rick with it, and I'll paraphrase it my own way. But being just as adamant and impatient about change, but realizing that it's okay that it doesn't happen overnight. So I think not the patience for change, but the patience for the move after move and knowing that things are moving forward and will work out.
Great. Andy, thank you so much for being such a amenable interview. I appreciate it. I really appreciate understanding and learning more about your journey too. I didn't know a lot of that early stuff. So thank you so much for being on Climate Pioneers. Really appreciate it.
I love it. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you to our audience. Really appreciate your viewing. Take care.